Hey everyone, my name is Daniel, I'm 32 years old, and today I need to tell you something that completely changed my life. It's a story I've kept to myself for over 15 years, but lately it won't let me sleep properly. Maybe you'll think it's madness, maybe you'll think I'm making it up, but I guarantee that every word I'm about to say here is true. Before I start, I want you to understand something. I've always been a skeptical person. I never believed in strange stories. I always looked for logical explanations for everything. But what happened in my grandmother's house? Well, that changed everything. The story begins when I was 17 years old. My grandmother Dorothy had passed away a few months earlier, and my family was organizing her belongings to sell the house. It was an old house, one of those built in the 40s, with long hallways, solid wood doors, and that characteristic old house smell that never goes away, no matter how much you clean. I always had a very close relationship with my grandmother. She practically raised me, since my parents worked a lot and I spent every afternoon at her house after school. I knew every corner of that house, every creak in the floor, every door that made noise when opened. Or at least I thought I did. On the day we went to clean the house, it was me, my parents, my uncle Roberto, and my aunt Sandra. We divided the tasks. My parents took the living room and kitchen, my aunt and uncle took the basement and garage, and I was responsible for the bedrooms on the second floor. It was heavy work, full of memories and emotion. It was when I was organizing the main bedroom, where my grandmother slept, that I noticed something strange. I was measuring the wall to calculate how much paint would be needed for the renovation, when I realized the measurements didn't match. The interior wall was about 2 meters shorter than the exterior wall. That didn't make sense. At first, I thought it was just my mistake. I measured again and again, but the result was always the same. There was a space there, hidden behind the wall. I was intrigued and began examining the wall more closely. That's when I noticed something I had never perceived before. An almost imperceptible line in the wallpaper, as if there was a door there. I ran my hand along the wall and felt there was a difference in texture. I pressed lightly and heard a very low click. Suddenly, a section of the wall moved inward, revealing a small secret door that I never knew existed. My heart raced. How was it possible that in all these years, spending so much time in that house, I had never discovered this? Why had my grandmother never told me about this secret space? I opened the door and came face to face with a small room, approximately 3 meters by 2. There were no windows, just a small light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The smell was different from the rest of the house, drier, as if the air there hadn't circulated for a long time. And then I saw it. The walls were covered with photographs. Hundreds of them. Some were very old, in black and white, others more recent, in color. In the center of the room was a small table with a chair, and on the table, several notebooks stacked up. I was trembling. I didn't know if I should enter or call my parents. Curiosity was stronger. I turned on the light and entered the secret room. The photographs were of people I didn't recognize. Men, women, children, elderly people. Some of the photos were normal family portraits, wedding photos, birthdays. But others were different. They were photos of people who seemed to be suffering, crying. Some even appeared to be injured. What caught my attention most was that all the photos had dates written on the back. The oldest were from 1943, and the most recent were from a few months before my grandmother's death. I picked up one of the notebooks and began to read. It was my grandmother's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. But the content left me cold. March 1943. I met Martha today at the bakery. She was crying because her husband had lost his job. I managed to get her to trust me. Now I need to know more about her family. April 1943. Martha told me about her twin children. They're only 5 years old. What a perfect opportunity. I continued reading page after page and realized my grandmother was documenting the lives of unknown people. She wrote down intimate details about their lives, their fears, their weaknesses, their deepest secrets. And from the photos, it was clear she had gotten close to these people somehow. But the most disturbing was yet to come. As I continued reading, the notes became increasingly detailed and sinister. My grandmother described how she manipulated these people, how she got information about them, how she made them suffer psychologically. June 1943. I convinced Martha that I was her friend. Today I told her I saw her husband with another woman downtown. It's a lie, of course, but seeing the despair in her eyes was satisfying. July 1943. Martha came to me crying today. Her marriage is over because of my lies. She doesn't know I was the one who planted all the doubts. Now she's completely dependent on my friendship. Perfect. I was reading this in complete shock. The woman I knew as a loving and sweet grandmother was described in these notebooks as a completely different person. A person who fed on the suffering of others. I continued reading, going through the years. The notebooks documented decades of manipulation, lies, and psychological cruelty. My grandmother had a methodology. She chose vulnerable people, gained their trust, discovered their weak points, and then tortured them emotionally in subtle and calculated ways. What disturbed me most was realizing that many of the people in the photographs I recognized. They were neighbors, family acquaintances, people who frequented our house. Mrs. Wilson, who lived on the corner and always gave me candy when I was little. Mr. Martinez, who worked at the local market. The Johnson family, who my grandmother always said was so problematic. All these people had been my grandmother's victims. She had ruined marriages, destroyed friendships, planted mistrust, caused depression and anxiety in dozens of people over the years. And I never knew anything about it. But the worst was in the last notebook. The most recent notes were about my own family, about my parents, about my Uncle Roberto, about my Aunt Sandra, and about me. December 2007. Daniel is growing up and becoming more independent. I need to maintain control over him. Today I told him his parents are considering divorce. The expression of panic on his face was delicious. I remembered that day. My grandmother had taken me aside and told me, with tears in her eyes, that she had heard my parents discussing divorce. I had been desperate, afraid that my family would fall apart. I spent months worried, watching every interaction between my parents, looking for signs they were going to separate. But they never got divorced. In fact, they always had a solid marriage. My grandmother had made it all up just to see me suffer. January 2008. Daniel believes everything I say. Today I suggested he shouldn't trust his school friends so much, that they probably talk bad about him behind his back. I managed to plant the seed of paranoia. Now he'll question all friendships. And it was true. After that conversation with my grandmother, I began to distrust my friends. I analyzed every word, every gesture, looking for signs of betrayal. I lost several good friendships because of this paranoia she had planted in me. Page after page, I discovered how my own grandmother had manipulated my mind for years. She knew exactly which buttons to press, how to make me feel insecure, anxious, dependent on her approval. But what shocked me most was the last entry in the notebook, written only 2 weeks before her death. March 2008. I'm getting old and weak. Soon I won't be able to continue my work. But Daniel has potential. I see in him the same fascination with human suffering that I have. I need to find a way to pass my knowledge to him before I leave. Maybe through the notebooks. He's curious enough to search. I dropped the notebook from my hands. I was trembling, sweating cold. My grandmother had planned for me to discover that room. She wanted me to read those notebooks, to learn her techniques. She believed I was like her, that I had the same thirst to cause suffering in others. I looked around the room again. Now everything made sense in a horrible way. The photographs on the walls were trophies. Each face represented a life she had ruined, a person she had broken emotionally. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway. It was my father calling me. Daniel, are you okay? We haven't heard anything from you for a while. I'm fine, Dad. Just organizing some things here. My voice came out shaky, but apparently he didn't notice. I heard the footsteps moving away. I needed to make a decision. What to do with that discovery? I picked up one of the notebooks and flipped through it quickly. I found names, addresses, intimate details about dozens of people. Some had already died, but many were still alive. People who never knew why their lives had gone wrong. why their marriages had ended, why they had lost friends or developed mental problems. I thought about telling my parents, but how to explain that the woman they venerated, whom they considered an example of goodness and wisdom, was actually a sadist who fed on the suffering of others? I spent hours in that room, reading, trying to process everything. I discovered my grandmother didn't act alone. In the older notebooks, she mentioned other people, a network of individuals who shared the same obsession. They exchanged information, techniques, even lent victims to each other. The most disturbing thing was realizing how meticulous she was. Each manipulation was carefully planned, each lie strategically placed to cause maximum emotional damage. She studied human psychology not to help, but to harm more efficiently. And then I found something that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. At the end of the last notebook, there was a section titled, Observations about Daniel, Potential Successor. The boy shows promising signs. When I told him about his parents' divorce, I saw in his eyes not just fear, but also morbid curiosity. He wanted details, wanted to know exactly what had caused the problems in the marriage. That's good. Daniel has a natural tendency to observe people. I frequently see him analyzing other people's facial expressions, trying to understand what they're thinking. With the right training, this could be developed. The boy has already demonstrated ability to lie when necessary. Last week, when he broke the living room vase, he managed to convince his parents it was the cat. The lie was convincing and well elaborated. Promising. I was reading about myself as if I were an experiment, a project. My grandmother had spent years observing me, cataloging my behaviors, looking for signs that I could follow in her footsteps. And the most terrifying part? I recognized truth in some of her observations. I had always been curious about the dark side of human nature. When I watched crime documentaries, I was more interested in the psychology of criminals than in the victims. When my friends had problems, part of me was fascinated by the complexity of human drama. Could my grandmother have been right about me? Did I really have potential to be like her? These questions tormented me for hours. It was already night when I finally left the secret room. My family had already finished organizing their respective sections of the house and was waiting for me so we could leave. "You took a long time up there," my mother commented. "Did you find something interesting?" I looked at her, at my father, at my aunt and uncle, people I loved, who trusted me. How could I tell them about the discovery? How could I destroy the memory they had of the woman who had raised them? "No, nothing much," I lied. "Just some old photos and letters." Deciding to lie was instinctive, automatic. And as the words left my mouth, I remembered my grandmother's observations about my ability to lie. Could she have been right? During the following weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about the secret room. I returned to the house several times, always with some excuse for my family. I continued reading the notebooks, diving deeper and deeper into the dark world my grandmother had built. I discovered she maintained correspondence with other people like her. Letters that revealed a national network of individuals dedicated to what they called human gardening, the process of cultivating suffering in people as if it were an art. In one of the letters, dated 1987, she wrote, "Dear Evelyn, the Martinez project is progressing well. I managed to convince the wife that he's having an affair, and now he believes she's stealing money from the joint account. The mutual distrust is growing beautifully. Soon, the family will be completely destroyed. I'm attaching photos of the progress for your appreciation." It was like reading about a macabre hobby. These people treated the destruction of human lives as a form of entertainment. But what disturbed me most was recognizing that I was becoming obsessed with the reading. It wasn't pure horror I felt. There was also fascination. I wanted to understand how she did it, what the techniques were, how she managed to manipulate people with such precision. This realization terrified me. Was my grandmother right about me? That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to test myself. I chose a random person, a coworker named Marcus who always seemed a bit arrogant to me. Nothing serious, just a small manipulation to see if I could do it. Marcus was always bragging about his perfect relationship with his girlfriend. For a few weeks, I began planting small doubts. Casual comments about how some women were good at hiding things, made up stories about relationships that seemed perfect on the outside but were problematic inside. It worked better than I expected. Within a few weeks, Marcus was paranoid, questioning every action of his girlfriend, analyzing every word she said, looking for signs of betrayal. They started fighting constantly, and I felt satisfaction seeing that. There was something exciting about knowing I had created that chaos, that I had the power to influence another person's emotions and actions in that way. This scared me deeply. I stopped immediately and tried to fix what I had done. I told Marcus that I had heard unfounded rumors, and they were probably just gossip. I managed to ease the situation, but his relationship had already been shaken. Guilt consumed me for weeks. I had proven to myself that I had the capacity to be like my grandmother, but I had also proven that I still had enough conscience to feel bad about it. For months, I struggled with this duality. Part of me wanted to go back to the secret room, wanted to learn more about my grandmother's techniques. Another part of me wanted to burn everything and forget it existed. That's when I had a third option. What if I used this knowledge for good? What if, instead of causing suffering, I used my understanding of psychological manipulation to help people? I began studying psychology formally. I used my grandmother's notebooks as a manual of what not to do, learning to recognize signs of manipulation so I could help other people protect themselves. I discovered that several of my grandmother's victims were still alive and still dealing with the psychological traumas she had caused. Some developed chronic anxiety, others depression. Many never knew why their lives had fallen apart. I created an anonymous blog where I shared information about psychological manipulation, warning signs, how to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate you. I didn't mention my grandmother directly, but I used the knowledge I had acquired from reading her notebooks. The blog became popular. I received emails from people who said the information had helped them recognize toxic relationships, get out of emotional abuse situations, identify when they were being manipulated at work or in the family. For a few years, I felt I had found balance. I was using my grandmother's dark legacy for something positive. But then something happened that changed everything again. In 2015, 7 years after discovering the secret room, I received a letter at my apartment. There was no return address, just my name and address written in elegant cursive handwriting. Inside the letter, there was a single sheet of paper with a short message. Dear Daniel, we know about your discovery in your grandmother's house. We know about your blog. We know you have potential. If you're interested in meeting people who share your true interests, meet us at Central Park Cafe next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Look for the woman in red reading a book about gardening. A family friend. My blood ran cold. Someone knew about the secret room. Someone was watching me. And worse still, someone thought I was like my grandmother, that I had the same interests as her. For days I couldn't sleep properly. Who had sent that letter? How did they know about my discovery? I had never told anyone about the secret room. Tuesday arrived and I found myself walking toward the cafe. I didn't know why I was going. Curiosity? Fear? Or maybe part of me really wanted to meet these people. I found the woman in red exactly where the letter had indicated. She was an elegant lady, about 60 years old, with perfectly styled gray hair and a warm smile. She was reading a book about gardening as promised. Daniel? She asked when I approached. How do you know my name? Sit down, dear. We have a lot to talk about. She introduced herself as Helena. She said she had been one of my grandmother's correspondents for over 30 years. According to her, my grandmother had talked a lot about me in her letters, about my special potential. Your grandmother was an artist, Helena said with genuine admiration. Dorothy had a natural talent for understanding the human psyche and for sculpting people's emotions. It's rare to find someone with that ability. She ruined lives, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Helena laughed softly. She revealed truths, dear. The people she chose as projects already had weaknesses, flaws, cracks in their personalities. Dorothy just accelerated processes that were already in motion. It was almost a favor to them. It revealed their true characters. It was a disturbingly seductive way to think about it. For a moment, I almost caught myself agreeing. "We know about your blog," Helena continued. "It's interesting how you're using Dorothy's teachings in an inverted way. But don't worry, we understand you need to maintain a respectable facade. We all do that. How many of you are there? More than you imagine, fewer than we'd like. It's a select group, Daniel. We don't accept just anyone. But you have lineage, you have instinct, and more importantly, you have access to Dorothy's complete files." That's when she made me a proposal that left me speechless. The group wanted my grandmother's notebooks. They considered them valuable historical documents, manuals of refined techniques that could be studied and perfected. In exchange, they offered me access to a complete library of knowledge about psychological manipulation, techniques developed over decades by dozens of practitioners. They also offered me a network of contacts, influential people in various areas who could help me professionally. "Think of it as an academy," Helena explained. "A place where people with similar interests can meet, share knowledge, perfect their skills. It doesn't have to be destructive, Daniel. You can use this knowledge for whatever you want." The offer was tempting in a way that disturbed me. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately. The intellectual curiosity, the desire to completely understand that dark world, the morbid fascination I had been trying to suppress for years. I asked for time to think. Helena gave me an elegant business card with no information other than a phone number. "Call when you're ready," she said. "But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come frequently." For weeks, I carried that card with me. I looked at it constantly, imagining what it would be like to meet these people, learn from them, maybe even practice with them. But every time I thought about it, I remembered the photos in the secret room, the faces of my grandmother's victims, the suffering she had caused, the lives she had ruined just for fun. And then I thought about the emails I received through my blog. People who had managed to get out of abusive relationships, who had learned to recognize manipulation, who had rebuilt their lives after being psychologically tortured by others. The decision wasn't easy, but in the end, it was clear. I went back to the secret room one last time. I took all the notebooks, all the photos, all the letters. I took everything to the house's backyard and burned it. I watched each page turn to ashes, each victim's photo disappear in the fire. I didn't call Helena. I never went back to that cafe. I changed my address and continued my blog, but now with an even clearer mission: help people protect themselves against psychological predators like my grandmother. But the story doesn't end there. 3 years later, in 2018, I received another interesting email. It was from a woman named Sarah, who had read my blog. She told me her grandmother had died recently, and she had found a secret room in her house, full of notebooks and photographs documenting decades of psychological manipulation. Over the years, I received 4 more similar emails. People who had discovered that their elderly relatives had lived double lives as psychological predators. I realized my grandmother wasn't an isolated case. Helena was right. There are more people like this than we imagine. The difference is that now I know there are also people like me, people who discovered this dark world but chose to use this knowledge to protect others, not to harm them. Today, 10 years after discovering the secret room, I still wonder about the choices I made. Was destroying those notebooks the right decision? Could I have used that information to help my grandmother's victims more directly? Sometimes, in moments of anger or frustration, I feel that familiar impulse. The urge to use what I know about human psychology to hurt someone who irritated me. It's an impulse I recognize comes from my grandmother, from the dark potential she saw in me. But every time I feel this, I remember her words in the last notebook: "Daniel has potential." She thought I was like her, that I would inevitably follow in her footsteps. And maybe she was right about the potential. Maybe I really do have the capacity to be an efficient psychological predator. But she was wrong about one thing. She thought I wouldn't have a choice. I do have a choice. Every day I choose to use this knowledge to protect, not to destroy. I choose to build, not demolish. I choose to be the person she never thought I could be. The secret room in my grandmother's house taught me something important. We all have potential for evil. The difference lies in the choices we make. And although I carry my family's dark legacy, I choose every day to be something different. Sometimes I still dream about that room, about the photographs on the walls, about the notebooks full of documented suffering. But when I wake up, I know I made the right choice. I destroyed that legacy of pain and created something new in its place. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: pay attention to the people around you. Not every psychological predator is obvious. Sometimes they are the closest people, the ones we love most, the ones we'd least suspect. And if you ever discover you have potential to be something dark, remember you have a choice. You always have a choice. That's my story. Thank you for listening.